Gonna be honest, it's pretty hard to put on a straight face after that particularly ridiculous video with TJ. Just him vaselining up his cloak. It's a bit too much for me.
Did you call that a cloak? It's a poncho there.
A poncho. The word eluded me, all right? I'm going, fantasy here. It's a cloak. But either way, that is not what we need to focus on right now. God knows, or I will end up saying something that gets me fired. But now we're going to jump to our winners match for the bracket. Posesi versus Alutemu, the two Japanese players in the group, as we keep on mentioning, doing very, very well indeed. Alutemu, I think... it's kind of a different story here for both of these players. Obviously, they are both guaranteed to be in Division A at this point. But it's a different story for what this means to both the players, I think. Posesi is obviously proving himself. If you're a real Hearthstone aficionado, especially in the APAC scene, I think you will know that Posesi is a very, very strong Hearthstone player indeed. But, to the Hearthstone viewership who maybe haven't seen him play all too much, he's got to show he's got what it takes, that he deserves to be amongst the likes of Glory and Surrender in Asia Pacific. But on the other side for Alutemu, it's kind of about, I think, making a return to grace after a little bit of a lull in Season 2 last year.
Yeah, I think it's definitely fair to say that we've got the new blood and probably Alutemu with a possible comeback. And on top of that, there's the dynamic of two of these guys as practice partners, as friends, and as mirrored lineups, as we can see. They have gone for the conventional bans, much to my chagrin, but nothing too unexpected there. Posesi, you made a good point about he's got a lot to prove, and he's got what it takes, the potential to keep up with the likes of Surrender. And I would definitely agree. Anybody whose first question after 100 years of sleep would be, is Leroy back in Standard? Has what it takes.
Oh, a man after my own heart, it must be said. I miss him already. Leroy, not Posesi. Never met him. But either way, jumping into the first game now. The mage being left up for both players. Like you said, is it an identical list here for both the players? On the mage, at least to most of the cards.
From what I can see, sorry, let me pull up Posesi's real quick.
No worries. I think it's basically just an ooze teched in for Posesi. It looks like the only real difference between the two players' lists, and an Astromancer Solarian. Oh no, something else teched in on the 2-mana slot. I apologize for Alutemu. But I think that does mean that we are going to see the mage come up first for Alutemu, if I heard correctly.
Yes, I think that is absolutely right. And before we get into that, I have a little trivia for you, Derek. Well, let's call it a question. How many 7-cost minions do you think there are in Standard right now?
50?
That's actually really close. There are 53.
Oh, that was a good guess.
So it was a 1 in 53 for Flurry to hit exactly Winged Guardian with that Hunter's Calling.
Yeah, I've got to be honest. If I have a 52 out of 53 chance to win a game of Hearthstone, I'm taking that every single time.
All right, Mage again on the plate. Alutemu facing it once more. Posesi, I don't feel like the Blizzard are ever going to be kept, but it feels like we've been seeing Mana Saver kept more and more often. But he actually even does keep the Blizzard versus Druid. I guess if there's any class that you would feel like keeping it against, it is Druid.
Mm-hmm. Are you in favor of something a little bit more proactive, however?
I am, yeah. Especially since knowing that the way Druids build boards against Mage, they're hardly ever going to be just playing Eek Glowfly as 2/2s. They would either buff it or stick a Soul of the Forest onto it. Granted, Posesi with the Mana Saver in hand, maybe that makes the Blizzard a little more tempting because he can curve right into it.
Yeah. Bit of a tough choice now for Alutemu. We could, of course, see Coin Overgrowth into Glowfly into Mount Seller, but it looks like he's probably trying to save the coin probably for for the Mount Seller. And I think I actually like this. There's a stronger curve he can go for, in my opinion, of setting out the Overgrowth on 4, the Mount Seller turn probably on 7 mana, I should say, and then a Glowfly Overgrowth on turn 8 or 9. Looks like a very powerful curve that Mage will struggle to answer.
Yeah, definitely see it. The Soul of the Forest, for such a key card, it makes you wonder why it's only a 1-of in the deck, but I guess in many matchups, it's a little bit redundant with buffs, but particularly against, say, Mage and Priest, having that other layer of protection can be game-winning. But wow, Mount Seller already active.
This is the Druid we've been missing the last couple of games. The perfect curve into Mount Seller, even with Glowfly to follow up. He can redraw with Fungal Fortunes if things are starting to look a little bit lackluster. This is already incredibly dominant from Alutemu.
Yep. It's just a question of whether he wants to commit yet another spell, because that does, potentially slow down the Glowfly. But it doesn't look like he's going to be able to go Glowfly Solo the Forest next turn already, unless the draw is exactly Innervate. So he could redraw spells with Fungal Fortunes. I don't mind committing the Iron Bark right here.
I really like throwing down the Iron Bark. It makes your board a little bit less vulnerable to trades, obviously, and the curve, I think, just works out very beautifully the next couple of turns anyway. You have Fungal Fortunes into Glowfly, and if that's cleared, you have Glowfly into Soul of the Forest.
Seems good. And this is what we talk about as the strength of Druid versus decks, even if those opposing decks have AoE, is that if Druid can put down boards consecutively, at some point, if every turn you're asking them to have the answer, they will run out.
Yeah.
Tiamat able to come down this turn already for Posesi. With the Wind Fury Rush, he can clear
the Mount Seller?
Yeah.
Just about.
Exactly enough.
Yeah, very clean.
Not this turn, but as the refill, it seems like Alutemu can just have full boards for the next 3 turns. Or is he just going to play it straight up here? That's interesting.
I guess the thinking is that going into turn 7, there's not much that can clear outside of like a Rolling Fireball specifically, or Zephrys, obviously, at any point.
It is exactly those two. Or, if we want to get really strict about it, Conjurer's Calling.
Sure. I'm sure Alutemu would welcome 2 Winged Guardians, however.
Yeah. It seems like a bold play, but you know what? I don't mind it. Because it seems like if he doesn't go for that, then the play becomes Fungal plus Glowfly, which is, he's not guaranteed to get exactly Innervate Power of the Wild, so the board then becomes kind of vulnerable to Blizzard.
What to do?
But you could also just say, alright, Blizzard this turn, and then next turn I have the Glowfly plus Soul.
Yeah, that was definitely my first instinct. Temu holding off even further, though. I guess he's thinking this is enough of a board. It does obviously still threaten lethal next turn with double Savage Roar.
Oh, that is the perfect draw for Posesi here. I was gonna say, all of the other plays
think about it.
feel like they're expending too much resources. Blizzard doesn't seem worth it on that board. And then Twilight Drake Frostbolt doesn't clear everything either. That just smooths things out for Posesi. Now Alutemu, with the refill he was planning for, even played the Rising Winds for a minion because it seems like he's gonna go for Overflow sometime soon.
Ooh, it's tough. Posesi almost wishes that Alutemu had actually buffed these to 3 health, because then he could freeze them with Blizzard and they, wouldn't die. Whereas, of course, Blizzard here will kill all of them. The 2/2s will be left behind to attack. And in that instance, the best clear that I think Posesi can do on this turn is Blizzard Frostbolt, I suppose. Or Rolling Fireball Frostbolt clears off the same amount of damage.
Yeah, while also taking out more of the first layer.
Okay. I am fine with this, but from Alutemu on the other side, none of that even matters. Double Savage Roar, boom boom, easy lethal, taking the game. Again, just dominating with the Druid. I don't know if it's the lists, the extra practice with it, but man, week after week, all three of the Japanese players are bringing the Druid and dominating with it.
So is the conclusion about Druid we're coming to just that it's good if you're Japanese? And otherwise, it isn't?
The conclusion I'm coming to is it's good if you play it a lot and know the matchups very, very well. It's not at all saying that I think Kin, who had a lot of, who was struggling with it earlier on, was making particularly bad plays with the deck. He got the bad matchups, it's got to be said. There was a very aggressive start from the Shaman and the Paladin, but I do still feel there were other lines he could have explored that maybe would have cleared more of the Murlocs earlier on, but that doesn't matter. That game is long past. Now it's Alutemu and Posesi, and he is just putting on an absolute power display, tour de force, amazing showcase of the power of Druid so far today.
In honor of Malfurion, not to be outdone by his brother, who has not really gotten much spotlight this weekend because of our format, but good to see that good old Malf is still pulling his weight. Anyway, we are just going to go to a short break, but until then, stay tuned, guys, because we've got the rest of the series coming up.
Hello everyone and welcome back to Hearthstone Grandmasters. You are just in time for the winners match of today here in Asia Pacific. If you just joined us as well, then let me remind you that this is our third and final week of the Swiss portion here today for all the regions, Asia Pacific here and now, and of course Europe and Americas, which will be following directly after we have finished here today. So this is very, very important for all of these players to make sure that they end up in Division A once we head into the round robin next week. Here for the matches today in Asia Pacific, everything is fairly set. So it's really just about pride and trying to prove you're better than your enemies or your practice partners, depending on who you're up against. But in the other regions, there's a little bit more to play for, I think. So make sure you stick around all day for all this fantastic Hearthstone action. But now, with the win on the Druid for Alutemu, it's looking pretty good for him in the remainder of the series, I'd say, Gia.
Yeah, especially if you're in the camp that says that Druid is unfavored against these two one-time wonder decks. The Shaman and the Paladin, probably not going to be seeing those anytime for the rest of the season, given that we will be going back to regular Conquest with only 4 decks brought, starting next week when we go to round robin. But yeah, we always thought, well, you guys always thought that Druid was kind of unfavored against those two. You know what? I actually would agree when we look at the data overall, but it still remains to be seen whether the disparity is that huge, because we've also just highlighted just how well certain players know the matchups, how specifically they're keeping things in the mulligan and playing to early board states, which you don't see in other Druid matchups.
Yeah, I think that they've adapted very, very well with the Druid gameplay overall in order to combat that, which is what seems so weird to me, because I feel like APAC players are kind of piloting the Druid against aggro very well, but they're kind of lagging behind in terms of the techs with their Druid. We're only seeing a couple of players bringing bees at all, whereas it feels like you should bring 2 copies of it in this format, given how strong it is against Shamans and the Paladins. But that's a story for another time. Obviously, the Druid is now out of the way, so Alutemu is lining up the Shaman here, which, to be fair, we've seen do pretty well against the Mage.
Yeah, a lot of it has to do with the fact that Mage's early game removal is very specific. Not all of them are running Frostbolt, but they need to get something like Doomsayer to not only remove 1 for 1, but actually get the tempo back. If it's just removing 1 for 1, I feel like the Shaman still kind of has the leg up if they're just continuously able to develop a new totem. But the hand for Posesi looking pretty strong already. Zephrys in the opener, always a welcome sight.
Yeah, we've seen how powerful Wild Growth can be specifically. It's not necessarily the kind of hand that necessarily lends itself to Wild Growth specifically, because you already have a 3-drop with Arcane Intellect, and ramping up to 5 means you're kind of skipping over Twilight Drake, or you might play it anyway and just float a mana. So do you think we'll see a deviation from the expected game plan of Wild Growth, or is it still just the most powerful thing you can do?
I think it largely depends on what Alutemu's first 2 turns are, as Posesi will be on the coin. So he's going to play Zephrys 2. Or turn 1. Coin it out here. Does it just give Forcer's advantage? Powered Shield?
I think Powered Shield is what he's looking for.
Whoa. Okay.
Wow, this is a line that is only recently started being explored, obviously with the changes to Classic Priest. Powered Shield going from 1 to 0 mana and no longer drawing a card. But right now, this is insane. Look at what this does for Posesi.
Well, that throws everything I said out the window. And rightfully so. I think that was a great spot from Posesi. Especially, it's kind of the same philosophy as how Druid, for example, would innervate out the Rising Winds. Zephrys just gives itself an additional 2 health. It already comes with the Iron Bark, sorta.
Oh my god, Gia, this is just poetry in motion here. Seeing the Shaman dominated by Coin Totem Golem on the opposite side. Mwah. Warms my heart.
Alright, you say dominated, but Alutemu with the Serpent Shrine, that was the perfect answer he's had. And if Posesi, it looks like he's just going to go for the draw here. That means Alutemu will be able to stick the Mana Tide for at least this turn.
Worth mentioning, I suppose, that Posesi did have a clear available on the previous turn with Arcane Breath and double Ray of Frost, but I fully agree with his decision that it is a massive over-expenditure especially when you had a very valid alternate line with just AI on 3 to fill up your hand and start finding the removal.
But as it stands, Posesi's got a pretty good answer here with the Solarian, with Arcane Breath, and he's got an active Dragon as well in hand. And he can just freeze the unstable, what's it called? Oh, this card is basic. But the 2/4. You can freeze the 2/4 so that it protects the Solarian on board.
Mm-hmm.
What to do? What to do?
It seems better than Twilight Drake as my first inclination, especially since that's the only dragon in hand, so if he plays it, the dragon caster goes offline.
I agree. Yeah, I think just removing the totems is too important, especially Mana Tide, which can just be so devastating if it sticks.
Ooh, all of these except the mirror entity look interesting.
Yeah, I like the missiles most. Just rips it straight away, okay.
Wow. Not bothering to freeze here, okay.
I mean, arguably the best outcome. Second best, I suppose, to just killing it. But, you know, dealing 1 damage so it trades, it's not bad.
Ooh, but with the healing totem, I guess it doesn't matter if he's going to give it Divine Shield anyway. Like the 1 damage versus 2, it's still like awkward to clear. So the Guardian Aug Merchant can of course let him take trade, and then he can develop the Evil Totem, but of course walks right into Rolling Fireball.
Does this hand beat Rolling Fireball, though? I think is the real question. I don't think so.
I would also assume that it doesn't.
So is little time.
You can commit the Totemic Might to just give things a little bit more resiliency.
Yep.
But the fact that the 2 totems are next to each other, I think it's hard to call this a strict slip-up, but it depends. I guess he's saying that if he wants 1 totem to die, that he'd rather lose both totems instead of a totem and the 2/3.
Right, I think this is actually pretty good positioning, because it means the Evil Totem and the attack damage minions in the Orc Merchant and the Elemental can't all die. He has to choose whether to kill the Evil Totem or remove damage off the board. I think this is actually pretty clever by Alutemu.
In most cases, I would agree, but with double Totemic Surge and potential to draw payoff cards, I felt like maybe keeping a totem was more important.
I guess
it's
maybe.
Hard to say. It's
really hard to say. I think I actually prefer it this way, though. I've got to say, double Totemic Surge on 1 minion. That means he only gets a 4/4 on board with the Healing Totem. He didn't have the Totemic Reflections in hand at the time. And with Bloodlust in hand, I think I'd rather keep a little bit wider on the board with the Orc Merchant and the Elemental.
Right, fair enough. So, looks to me like he's reaching for a Bone Wraith Doomsayer play. Oh, okay, so just double Ray of Frost and Ping. That works too. Especially since he freezes the totems in particular. Very clever.
Yep, very, very good stuff. Just sets up very nicely for a lot of flexible series of plays for Posesi. Siamat looks like it will probably be pretty good. Waste Warden, if he's able to take out the totems as well, looks very strong.
Well, there's a clear, but it is expensive.
It's the only play, though. I think if you lose this board, the game ends.
On this one. Agreed. The Taunt Totem is a pretty good outcome because now Siamat can't just rush Wind Fury.
Yep.
I feel like he's not in that bad of a spot that he needs to rip it now. The Rush Wind Fury still looks perfectly fine to me.
I mean, he
would
doesn't
leave only 5 damage
need to, but you know, maybe he should anyway. So are you thinking Siamat or Waste Warden if you want to go for the box here?
Yeah. I like the look of Siamat.
Okay.
Winds of the South. Come to my aid.
I don't think we've seen any rare Tiamats on our stream, unfortunately. But in Europe, there was the rare Taunt Wind Fury.
Oh my god, I cannot wait to see a Taunt Wind Fury. I feel like on bird watching or on Safari, it's the lesser spotted Taunt Wind Fury Tiamat.
Here, you see Tiamat in its natural habitat. Okay, it is kind of a resilient board for Alutemu. And granted, if he just trades away the Tiamat, then Posesi might actually have to rip a box.
Yeah.
And then, well, and then it's not up to me, Dark. It's not up to you or Alutemu either.
He's finally got himself a board representing lethal. It is the absolute, complete and utter final vestige of hope here for Alutemu. And Posesi is going to put his life in the hands of the box.
I love the greeting before it. Good
Wow,
start.
that is a good first spell.
Wow, it even targets a
Pretty good.
opposing minion. Okay.
That's pretty good.
Number 4. That probably kills it. What?
Whoa.
It's always targeting. When did
It's
when did
always
Puzzle
targeting
Box,
the other minion.
when did Puzzle Box get the same effect as Solarian Prime? when did I miss this patch note, Derek?
Hello.
Oh.
Well played.
Yep. Well, you know what, Alutemu? After the Winged Guardian last game, I think that you would deserve this to happen. This is just karma, to be perfectly honest, as Posesi does take the win there. It was likely to happen in one way or another with the Puzzle Box. It wasn't an especially difficult board to clear from Alutemu, but there you have it. And a second game going to Posesi.
All right. Well, that is one mage out of the way. Right. I can't be like Sottle. I can't always just hate on mage. One of us has to take the opposing stance there.
You know what? I will happily take the opposing stance. I'm an acolyte of Fino now. He's just
All right.
every day streaming away, jamming box on 6 every single game, and I love it. I have been converted into the light of Puzzle Box of Yogg-Saron.
All right. Not just Karma, but also Nirvana for Dara. And is it going to be Alutemu playing mage next then? Is that at least what you want to see, Mr. Box Acolyte?
Well, okay, putting my actual Hearthstone caster's hat back on again instead of Degenerate who likes watching Puzzle Box. He's queuing Shaman first, and I don't think it really matters whether he goes for Shaman or Mage here. It's just deciding which deck he doesn't want to queue, doesn't want to have to take the win with. And if I had to guess, I would definitely say that is Paladin, given that he's queued the Shaman. And if I had to say between Paladin and Mage, Mage definitely feels significantly stronger at the moment. So I really wouldn't mind either Paladin or Mage, Shaman or Mage coming down here for Alutemu.
Right. And between Shaman and Mage, it's actually a question mark to me what I feel like among those. Is it better against Druid? Because I feel like Posesi would want to queue the Druid at some times, given that I think the Japanese players seem to still respect its power level.
Interesting mulligan now for Alutemu. I wonder if we'll see the Storm's Wrath being kept here. We saw it kept somewhat unconventionally, I think you could argue, by Flurry, just in the previous series against Alutemu, weirdly enough. And maybe he will absorb some of that power from Flurry's strategy by holding on to it.
The Mana Tide looks a bit exciting here. Might be a bit greedy because the 3 health stat line is weak to a lot of Druid removal, but none of it seems particularly good enough for Alutemu. What I want to note, though, is Posesi actually tossed away the Wrath in his opener, which at first when I was looking at how this matchup goes, I felt like, at least one piece of removal should seem decent to deny totems just snowballing. But the more I've seen the mulligans from these players who have been taking wins with Druid, it seems like they've just been mulliganing for their own game plan, not so much for removal.
Now this is interesting, Gia. I really like coining out the totem here. I'm not exactly sure which totem I would prefer Alutemu coin out though. Obviously going for the evil totem first gives him an extra lackey. But if he went coin hero power first, maybe that wouldn't have warranted a Wrath and he would have been more likely to get reflections on 3. And if it had warranted a Wrath, it would have meant the evil totem is more likely to be hit by totemic reflections. So I think thinking it out, I would have actually preferred it the other way from Alutemu.
It's going really deep because I myself was paying attention to Posesi's turn. I was thinking of hero power Moonfire instead of expending a Wrath there.
Wow, interesting.
His evil totem only has it's less health than the Flame Tongue and the Mana Tide, which died to the Wrath. I feel like Wrath might be more valuable there, whereas hero power doesn't necessarily get much done.
Yeah, I think I agree with you there. Also, as Wrath can be used to draw if you need to a little bit later on, it's much more flexible. Posesi realizing the power of the totem in expending a lot of resources to clear it off. Yeah. Oof. He's going to be happy he did.
So, I made a point about keeping proactive cards as Druid, but the game plan still, I guess if you're not getting that right is the game plan does kind of shift to being reactive in the early turns. It's very interesting. I would love to pick their brains about what actually is the most consistent line for this matchup. But for here, Posesi has managed to stave off the early pressure and can play Glowfly for at least 4 flies next turn.
There's another really tough choice now for Alutemu as to whether he goes Kobold Lackey plus Storm's Wrath on this turn. Obviously, that's the most powerful immediate play he can make, which I like the sound of. The downside is, of course, the Overload, which means he cannot go Totem plus Totemic Reflection on the following turn. I think even with that factored in, though, because we've seen so removal, it's been a Rastal Power, a Bog Beam, and a Moonfire. If you just go all in here from Alutemu, it's really unlikely that the totem is actually removed.
Yeah, especially going into their turn 5 where they're probably looking to play Glowfly.
Yeah.
I don't hate developing the minion, but Alutemu, I think, has better plans for not overloading here.
Fair enough, fair enough.
Now he can go double Storm's Wrath and then Totemic Reflection. Well, it's the same.
I don't mind the look of that. Is there any consideration for Storm's Wrath plus Splitting Axe on this turn? Because it gives you another immediate attack.
It does, but I think buffing the board twice gives you immediate value trades, so
true.
I prefer that.
Fair enough.
Prevents Posesi from getting trades onto the Lackey 1-for-1.
Yeah, the curve just works out so beautifully as well. If you go Totemic double Storm's Wrath and then Splitting Axe on 6 with the double Overload, perfect mana expenditure. You're probably getting yourself a bunch of really big totems as well.
Posesi still has 1 piece of removal in hand, but will it be enough? Oh, the Bees tech can come in real clutch here.
Yeah, that could be huge. It allows him to clear off both totems pretty effectively as well, actually.
I like the usage of the Savage Roar here. I didn't actually see this.
Yeah.
I was looking at Wrath and Hero Power or something like that, but this ends up so much better. Yeah.
Much better. And honestly, it's a bit of a disaster now for Alutemu. He can go for Splitting Axe, as we've seen many, many times, as basically just a War Axe, a 3-2 weapon that costs a heck of a lot more.
I'm looking at Serpent Shrine just to remove one thing and develop another. And then he could go for Flame Tongue Splitting Axe on turn 7. I don't know. It feels like if you're going to use Splitting Axe just to remove 1 minion, isn't that what Serpent Shrine does? It's the same amount of damage you're investing.
What to
Oh, right, but the overload prevents him from going Flame Tongue Splitting Axe, so it would have to be normal hero power into Splitting Axe.
I think whatever it is, it's a slightly longer term game plan than Alutemu will have time for, to be honest.
And now we see the Eagles rushing in. Not quite as early as they have been in other matchups, but it seems like Eagles just naturally prey on totems.
Is that the new Hearthstone expression, the early eagle gets the totem?
Mm-hmm.
It's true. It's actually a pretty good summary of this matchup.
So it's just a toss-up between another eagle or the rat. Given that the Cobra doesn't actually trade up into anything on the board, I don't mind just playing another eagle, because the Raft can be, an emergency switch for a totem that he might not have board to remove in the future. Although, to be fair, I don't feel like Posesi is losing board anytime soon. The early crab gets the Murloc too, but not in this matchup.
This crab just gets dumpstered, sadly. I think it's just got to be Splitting Axe, right? And then you can start chipping away the board. It feels so bad, but I just don't think there's anything else that even gets you close. And then maybe if the Druid's hand is completely dead, Alutemu will have some hint of a chance.
If we're talking about dead hands from Druid, a reason why I like that I'm so flip-floppy. Like, when it's winning, I'm like, I'm back on board. When it's losing, yeah, maybe it is unfavored. But I can objectively say that Druid, compared to at least Shaman and Paladin, don't have as many whiffs off the top, because they're either playing development card draw. There is so much card draw in the deck, which is why it feels like it can consistently get to its game plan, even though the game plan is probably too slow in certain matchups. Like, every time I've played against Druid and hoped that they just whiff off the top, it's just never happened. They have Overflow, they have double Rising Winds, they have Wrath per cycle, even Overgrowth and Wild Growth can cycle at a certain point, and the Fungal Fortune.
And with an army of 3/2s, Posesi looks like he is just going to be marching to victory, or flying and stalking to victory very, very quickly.
You win this.
No chance at all. The Druid, again, it does feel like the games where they're going very much for the removal rather than focusing on their own game plan are going better. I don't know, I'm kind of flip-flopping as well, depending on what's working at the moment. But I think the idea is that if you have an incredibly powerful ramp strategy where you're going Overgrowth into exactly the Mount Seller and you can just dominate the board, then obviously that's likely to win you the game. But if you don't have exactly that, I really like what we saw from Posesi there, where for 2 turns, he could have gone with the Overflow there to just draw through his deck and try and set up a Mount Seller turn, a Ysera, whatever else. Instead, he just kept populating the board, making sure that there was no way that Alutemu could come back with even a Splitting Axe and a bunch of small totems. And it led to a very well-deserved win, I think.
I definitely agree. Very well-deserved. And if there's any conclusion I'm drawing from about how to play the matchup, I guess it's dependent on 2 particular things. One, how the Druid hand pans out. Like you said, sometimes you can go for the Mount Seller game plan if your hand lends itself to that. And 2, the timing of when the removal pieces are used. We saw Posesi hold back on the Rising Winds early, when the totems could still have a very for Alutemu, which is in the early game. That's when everything is crucial, because they can all snowball if one is left online. So Posesi went for removal, and then when that was out of the way and Alutemu was hardly able to refill, that's when he played all the Eagles.
Yeah, very, very nicely done. Little that Alutemu could do. And I imagine we're probably going to see him lining up the Shaman yet again. Hasn't worked out for him the previous 2 times, but he's pretty much got to get a win with it, unless he wants to pivot over to the Paladin, which I would not advise at all. Instead, however, he's going to give it a go with the Mage. Again, given that it's Conquest, doesn't matter all too much which order you go in. Probably just wants to get himself a more likely win on the table, first of all.
That's right. And Alutemu has got the Zephyrs. I feel like Zephyrs has been popping up in almost every Mage game. And could be very well used for a backstab in this instance. If it is exactly the totem that comes out this turn.
Your wish is my suggestion.
Ooh, but with the... Oh man. 2 5-cost cards in hand make the wild growth really tempting, but this might be an instance where you go for the Siren on the rock and just backstab.
I think it's wild growth.
Really? We're so opposite on this.
It's coined out here, right? And I mean, even though last time I was arguing for backstab, I was just suggesting it as an option. I think it was probably still better to go wild growth that time. And I think it's probably better to go wild growth this time because it was coined out.
Okay.
So there's no totemic reflection available now. If it comes down on turn 3, it would have to be with a totemic might in order to survive the rolling fireball as well. So I feel like even if they have that, you're still able to fight back very well.
Alright, I can see it. I'd have been caster visioning a bit because he did get a lackey that can remove the Zephyrus while still preserving the evil totem. And that's probably the biggest factor here. But you did make a very good point that rolling fireball in most cases will still be able to clean things up.
And, you know, maybe they just don't have the reflections. It's very possible that things just carry on perfectly fine. Alutemu really now just hoping to find a big dragon, anything to populate his mid-game, like a dragon caster would be incredibly powerful with the deep freeze.
And Posesi also has a very tempting play here. Could just say, you don't have the removal, play another totem, and then try to get the most insane splitting axe we've seen throughout the day. But there's also an option to potentially put more than 8 health on the board. If he goes 2 1-drops, the Faceless of course summons the 2-drop, and then the Storm Trap.
So how much health would that be? That would be... So
it depends on the 2 cost.
Yeah, I mean, I think with the Storm's Wrath, you are always getting out of the 8 damage range. It would have to be like Doomsayer specifically to mess you up there.
Or Mana Wraith.
Oh, good point.
Or Pyromancer.
Also a good point. I guess there were a couple of duds, but even then, you're not playing around stuff like that, I think, in this scenario.
Definitely feels like a 1 in 53 type situation.
Oh no, wait, it's against Alutemu. You definitely play around it. Do not play that lackey.
So if we're thinking about positioning, is there any way that Alutemu could have done this a bit better? It's hard to say because the lackey generates to the right. And then he had to play the rush lackey. Oh, no, that was already on board, right?
I think there was... I think even if you put it like right in the middle, there's always a way that he can guarantee that it starts on the outside and moves on to kill the totem on the inside.
Yeah, I think the totem was always dying, but maybe there was a way he could have been left with, say, 1 more 2/2 and a 4/1 Sightless Watcher,
Maybe.
something like that.
Yeah. It's hard to know when you don't know what 2-drop you're going to get.
Yeah. So the Amplifier gives him pretty strong ping turn while still preserving the Frostbolt.
Is that better than AI Frostbolt, though? Oh, yeah, okay.
Yeah.
Taking the ping out for 3 damage, yeah, okay. I like this. As long as you're killing off the totem, I'm happy.
Yeah. Put something on the board and also saves Frostbolt for later on. It's good.
This is one of those weird games that we haven't seen all too much in a Shaman versus Mage specifically, where the slower plan may actually work for Posesi, being able to go for Flame Tongue plus Totemic Reflection on the same turn, or maybe setting up the Flame Tongue on this turn and then following up with the Reflection next turn. It looks like Alutemu maybe won't be able to develop the board quickly enough to fight back against that.
Yeah, and he got a great lackey for this game plan as well,
Yep.
probably the highest value of the options. And got a value minion off of that. Cobalt Spellkin can give Lightning Bolts, for example, which could be extra burst that Mage won't see coming necessarily.
And that Flame Totem is scary, to say the
Reno
least.
was 1 card too far down here. Solarian
so is
Frostbolt also
Astromancer
1 off.
Solarian. Yeah.
So is it going to be a Frostbolt onto the 4-2.
That only clears up 2 damage, right?
It does, but
you could frostbolt the flame tongue totem, because it means that the copy would be frozen for an extra turn, I believe. And of course, you don't take the immediate damage if it's buffed straight away.
I like that. It's a good call, and also has that side benefit of dealing 3 damage to the board instead of just 2 on the Rush Lackey, which makes things a bit easier for Reno, should that possibly happen.
Yeah, it would go... Yeah, I think with even like Totemic Reflection's hero power, Posesi would still be able to survive the Reno hit. Wow. So because of that, Alutemu's not even clearing it off.
He's going for max damage removal.
Was he dead to Bloodlust if he didn't do that? It would have been 4, 1, 3, and 9. Yeah, I think it would actually have been exactly dead to Bloodlust. Okay, that makes sense.
Good spot, good spot.
I wonder.
So for Posesi here, he can actually go for Splitting Axe this turn if he wants, and then just Totemic Surge instead of the Reflection. Sure, this is also very powerful. I was looking at trying to get the weapon swings to face ASAP, especially since he has Serpent Shrine and Cobalt Spellkin, but this seems to put like basically the same clock on Alutemu anyway.
Absolutely, and even with all of this coming down, no overload for Posesi, it is going to be a nice, clean, lethal, he knows it, on the following turn. Splitting Axe, Serpent Shrine, bada bing, bada boom, lethal coming through, and there's nothing that Alutemu can do to stop him this time.
And look at the Flame Tongue, it's so satisfying to watch. He's frozen. Why does it feel like when Shaman wins, it does so many things it doesn't even need to do? Like, it wins a lot, but when it loses, it loses by a whole lot.
It's one of those decks, right, where in the early game, if you hit, like, terminal totem velocity, you start taking off, and it's like exponential power just takes off so rapidly. But if you miss that breakpoint, it just doesn't catch light, and there's nothing that happens at all for the entire game. But I think from there, overall, from Posesi, it was a good kind of slow game plan he was going for, even with Coin Totem on 1, which almost got there, to be fair. He then pivoted over to a slightly slower game plan, and Alutemu was unable to fight back against all the damage.
Makes me wonder how much of a difference taking Backstab might have made. Obviously, it would have shut down the Rolling Fireball, which is very, very important for Alutemu on the turn that it did come down, because it did clear that Evil Totem in the future. But it's so hard. There's a lot of branching paths. Missed that card. Lots of different out happen, because then all the lackeys after the first one would not have been available to Posesi. Tough to say.
Very tough indeed, but that does mean, in good news for Posesi, he is going to be our winner for bracket B here today, the second half of the top 8. He will be moving on to the top 4 to be played out tomorrow, alongside Glory, his fellow countryman, on the other side. Now it is going to be Kin and Flurry, I think, for our next match, finding out who is going to be the first player eliminated out of bracket B.
And that is probably not too much sweat off their back either way, no matter who gets eliminated, because they are already locked in for Division A. But for Kin, if he wants to go for the max pride points, he actually has the chance to tie Surrender for current highest point total if he goes all the way and wins this whole week. Wouldn't that be kind of a story if he just makes the run all the way from the elimination bracket to dethrone who we said is undisputedly the best player in APAC right now?
I think that would mean a lot to Glory. He, I think, has had a little bit of doubts about his game plan. It feels like the times in which he's played worst has been these times when the rope is getting to him. He gets in his own head and is unable to utilize his very strong knowledge of the metagame. But this week, with perhaps a little bit less at stake for him, given that he was guaranteed to be Division A anyway, he's just been playing a whole lot better this week, and I think he's in prime position to overtake Surrender. But for now, we don't need to worry about Glory. We don't need to worry about Surrender. We need to worry